Your intuition is the most honest friend you'll ever have. A post by Biggs Burke. Hello, welcome to Tuesday's edition of the Toy Talks podcast, hosted by your host, none other than myself, Miss Toya A. Washington, back at you with a brand new episode each and every Tuesday as we do. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about, of course, the ginormous slithering hands of Jericho, Matt Hancock. We're going to be deep diving into kind of what's happened there and how we have actively seen white privilege manifesting and navigating politics and directly affecting our lives, to be quite honest with you. I also want to talk a little bit about the level of violence that I experienced in the workplace on Tuesday, yes. Last week, Tuesday, was a new episode of the Toy Talks podcast, and by 10 a.m. I encountered white violence in just the way, some white people, demonstrate their authority in the most demeaning way. And I need to talk about kind of how I handled it, but it's more about how important it is to have your own back in the workplace. And I tell you guys this all the time, but I mean from a position of understanding how vulnerable as black women that we are in the workplace. And I don't necessarily like using that word vulnerable because I don't want it to sound like we're overexposed, but the vulnerability comes from the fact that often, in white spaces, especially in the spaces that I work in, I definitely find that I often have to accept that there is a vulnerability that comes in being a black woman in white spaces. And that vulnerability comes from the fact that there is no privilege attributed to being a black woman at all. And also as well, you're dealing with stereotypes by the minute, especially with people that you don't even know people you haven't even made an impression on, people who have never engaged in conversation. They see your name, they may see a picture on Teams, and there is an assumption that is drawn, and it's born out of the foundation of prejudice. And we speak about it all the time, and I tell you guys, racism is sewn into the fabric of society, so why would it not be actively operating in your workplaces? So recently we have seen the crumbling of the dignity of the government. So for those of you who live outside of the UK, we have a health secretary who has been polarised by the pandemic and has been, operating side by side with the Prime Minister, as you would expect. Our former health secretary, and former as of 24 hours ago, is Matthew Hancock. And effectively what has happened is there was a breaking story on The Sun, and The Sun newspaper is like, I call it your chip, chip paper? Is it chip paper newspaper? It's like bottom barrel. Sorry, it's a bottom barrel newspaper. But when they have the exclusives and they're ready to drag you, the way they would drag you, and the way they dragged Matt Hancock, and I think what has to be made really, really clear about the reason why everybody's like shock horror is not just because of the content. I think it's also because we're in a global pandemic, and as much as the government try to pretend like we're coming out of it and all is going to go back to normal, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit later, there is a reality here that the government have imposed rules and regulations and have basically limited our access to each other, limited and restricted normal life as they have tried to, fight off, defeat, mitigate, strategize against the pandemic. And part of that has also included, and not limited to, contact with people. I remember seeing like a rule that you're not allowed to kiss somebody outside of your relationship. You're not allowed to people having one night stands, that was like a no-no type thing. And you can imagine like from a health perspective, health and the global health of the world has been at the forefront of everything over the last year. And in May, and we're talking, what are we now, June? So last month, the health secretary was caught having an affair, effectively, passionately caressing with his slithering hands. I call them the slithering hands of Jericho. And he was basically caught having an affair. And the way he was just kissing her passionately, you know that wasn't their first time at the radio. You know that they've been doing this for some time. They looked like well-seasoned cheaters, okay? And it wasn't just the still pictures that we saw from the Sun. It was actual footage. So we watched an active member of parliament in a sitting government in his office, and he was looking left and right to make sure he was not being rumbled, and then he was doing rumble in somebody's jungle. Dirty bastard! It was just, do you know what? Yeah, I don't know what was worse. I don't know if the picture was worse, the still picture, or the fact that we saw video footage of it. And obviously you can imagine the UK was in uproar, because it's like, on one hand, you're telling us that we're not allowed to see our family, our friends, we're not allowed to have effectively human contact with anyone outside of our bubbles, and yet you're having an affair. And we have watched the government time after time break the rules in which they impose on us, the general public. So to see the health secretary of all members of any political person or any member of parliament, to see them in that situation was really shocking. And I think what also shocked us is, and I'm going to speak from my perspective. Do you know what really shocked me? It was the fact that, these members of parliament that are elected by us, the public, they act like their shit doesn't stink. And if they do shit, they shit gold. They act like they're better than the people that have placed them in that position. So to see him in such a compromising position, Matt Hancock, we saw him in a way that we have never seen him. We have seen him snivelling on morning TV. This man callously sacrificed his grandmother, I think it's his grandma, 95 or 99, as the first person to receive the COVID jab. We haven't heard from her since. We saw him shaking and quivering. His bottom lip was shaking, and then he was pretending to do these fake tears, white fragility and all that. And then we see him like frisking. It was a sight of sore eyes, and my eyes were sore. And I didn't even know that he had like a receding balding patch in the middle of his head. That's how into this cheating that he was. We saw his whole head just doing fiesta. It was disgusting. I'm sorry. And I think what I found disgusting about it was that, I don't know what it is. When I see, or we talk about, or we hear of a married man cheating, it's just not clean, is it? It's just sordid, and I was uncomfortable to watch it. But what proceeded after that was even more shocking. There was uproar. I imagine the sitting government were, his peers were just shocked and everything else. But equally, I think it was confirmation as well that how can the health secretary lead the public, and especially in the pandemic, when he himself isn't living or standing by the rules in which that he's imposed on us. So there's a lack of respect there. I think also as well, this was an opportunity for us to see the Prime Minister actually minister. And he basically said that as far as he's concerned, it's happened, he's putting a line under it. And there was that lack of accountability that we have seen throughout the entire Tory government, the lack of accountability, whereby you can have Dominic Cummings breaking the COVID rule restrictions because he's testing his tyres to see if they work. And then you now have the health secretary fondling and canoodling with a married woman, him himself being a married man, in the offices, in the offices. So they're talking about also how it was leaked, and I want to talk a little bit about that later. But from the perspective of Boris Johnson, when we talk about leadership, it's about leading by example, but we all know that Boris Johnson has his own skeletons, and a lot of people allegedly say that he has a lot of children out there that are waiting for their father to acknowledge them, allegedly. And I think the fact that Boris did not sack him, I think that was testament to the fact that Boris Johnson's leadership is weak, and that he's not willing to hold himself accountable for anything. So why would he hold his cabinet accountable for anything, even if it means bringing his cabinet or his party into disrepute? And the disappointing part of it is, if you don't hold people accountable, how are people supposed to be then responsible for their actions? And Now we see the Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson, trying to double back saying, oh, I did sack Matt Hancock. No, you didn't. He resigned on national TV and you accepted his resignation after first saying that you draw a line under it and as far as you're concerned, it's a closed subject. In Matt Hancock's initial press release, he talks about being apologetic towards the British public. He's let them down and everything, but at no point did he mention his wife. And at that point, I knew this man was on crud. I knew he was on crud. I knew that he was a shameless goat, looking like 100% like a buffoon. Do you know that allegedly they're reporting that this man, when he knew that the story was going to break, yeah, he went home, apparently told his children or his child, packed a bag and left his wife. He told his wife and he left. The callousness of this is just, it's the ruthlessness for me. But this, to me, is the man that was the health secretary of the country. Do you remember last year in the throes of this pandemic? The health of the public was being led by Matt Hancock. And nobody knows where his hand was cocking or his cock was handing. And as far as I'm concerned, no one can try and tell me that this was just a fling or one-off. This has been going on for a while. And it has been discovered by the press in the way they do that apparently the lady that he had an affair with, he went to university with, he hired her as an aide as well. So she was part of his team. Of course she was. And actually, when you see the pictures, like still pictures of them, you know, out and about and stuff, you just think to yourself, yeah, I can see it. I think what I found very, very shameful, and actually, I felt quite embarrassed. Your husband has humiliated you in front of the entire country. And his wife was seen the next day with her ring out and about with shades on. And a part of me felt sorry for her, but the other part of me was like, actually, you're still walking around with the ring, so you think your marriage is salvageable, even though he's probably left you for this woman. And then we saw images of the woman that Matt Hancock had an affair with packing her car, and her actual husband was helping her to pack the car. If you see her husband, you just think to yourself, why did she cheat on him with Matt Hancock? You can't, and apparently they're in love. Imagine, it's only Oyubo that will wake up one morning and be like, I'm done with this. This is crazy to me. God forgive me, but it's just a bit mad. So no one's talking about the breaches of ministerial code. And this is what I mean about racism and the way it works. Like the oppressive nature of power, like real power that is had by... When we talk about oppression, the only way oppression exists is there has to be a structure where power is controlled, owned, had by a certain group. And that's the power they use then to oppress a group that is seen as lower than or lesser than. Do you know that if Matt Hancock was a black man or a black woman, I'm almost certain that the sitting Prime Minister would have sacked him or her before. At least that will happen, number one. But also the press would have gone deep dive into their childhood, their family, the level of harassment. And for me, this is what I say about the fabric of this society. The foundation is built on racism because there's no equal treatment. There's no fairness in the way I feel like a black politician would have been handled by the press, handled by the sitting government, versus how Matt Hancock got away scot-free. Let's really be serious. They're talking about now finding out who the leak was and who leaked the footage, because apparently there was a camera, and they tried to say that the camera was hidden in the smoke alarm in Matt Hancock's office, but the reality is there was a camera and someone leaked the footage. And all I'm saying is Dominic Cummings is very quiet at the moment. Dominic Cummings is very quiet at the moment. Our very own resident WikiLeaks. Very, very quiet, and no one can tell me. In my mind and in my personal opinion, I think Dominic Cummings has something to do with this, because the disdain that he had for Matt Hancock was personal, okay? But at the end of the day, whether he leaked it or not, the reality is we have to hold Matt Hancock accountable for his behaviour, and his behaviour was deplorable. Listen, people cheat every day, but it's the fact that they hold themselves, like some of these politicians, and I say some of these politicians, I find particularly with the Tory government, they act like we are all beneath them, you know, like their shit don't stink, that everything is perfect with them, and they have this hard job of managing the delinquent society who have placed them in a position. You know, the fact that he will never, well, I say he will never, but in my opinion, there's been no discussion about the breaches of ministerial code. For example, when you're having extramarital affair and you meant to declare it as a conflict of interest, number one. Number two, apparently, allegedly, his mistress's brother has a direct contract for PPE, and obviously, as the health secretary, connect the dots. Again, would you not have to declare that? Also, as well, I'm actually quite shocked that they're talking about investigating the leak, so investigating the whistleblower as a breach of the Official Secrets Act. But isn't there also a breach of your duty of care to the public to just be honest and transparent? What happened to transparency? But this is not surprising, right? Because when Priti Patel was accused of bullying and they found her to have been a bully, and there was a whole report done, there was calls for her to be sacked by Boris Johnson, and Boris Johnson refused to sack her, even though the report clearly states that there was a breach of ministerial code by Priti Patel in the way in which that she dealt with her staff, with the bullying accusations being found to be the truth. There was a breach of ministerial code. And I question, do you know what? I'm not sitting here telling you Dominic Cummings' hands is clean. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is we are, as a country in the UK here, being led by a Prime Minister that is not only incompetent, but the people that are around him are dangerous. Dangerous in the fact that they hold very, very senior influential positions that directly affect us, the citizens. And I don't think that they are competent enough to be in those positions. Number two, I think the fact that Matt Hancock resigned. He wasn't sacked, he resigned. It roots itself in privilege. Imagine resigning as the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, yet you are still an MP for West Suffolk. So let me get this right. You are resigning from the role of Health Secretary, but you are not resigning as a Member of Parliament for West Suffolk. And that is how white privilege operates, right? It's the privilege, it is understanding the powers and the power structures whereby your disgrace is only limited. They won't fully take your role away from you. But as a black person, we are not afforded that grace. And I was reading an article and they were talking about teaching. They were talking about teaching not teaching white privilege in schools, because it basically puts white people or white children, white kids, whatever, at a disadvantage by teaching white privilege. Can you imagine? This is the actual society that we're living in, that has a race report to say that racism does not exist in this society or in this country, when it was only recently discovered that the monarchy, yeah, you heard me, the Queen had, there was a rule that they would not employ ethnic minorities, black people. Can you understand how the power dynamic and the privilege operates here? So I want you to understand it from this perspective. Matt Hancock is effectively working for Boris Johnson. And in an organisation, in a workplace, in an organisation, he now has had an extramarital affair. It's been caught on camera. It's been in the tabloids. And he's now been forced to resign. And I say forced to because the members of the cabinet, no one came to his defence. No, there was no respect there. I think that he had no choice. And I think in Boris not sacking him, it basically polarised the fact that not only is Matt Hancock getting away with it, there is no opportunity to address bad behaviour, especially in a government that is facing a global pandemic, and the health secretary is instrumental in that. And he has been instrumental in it, good or bad. And I think that if you want a country to respect the government that leads it, you have to adhere to the social contract that exists, right? And the social contract is, if something goes wrong, you address it, and you address it head on. And part of that social contract means that we are also on the receiving end of that, right? So if we see something, or if we do something, we expect there to be repercussions. So, for example, if you break the law, you could be arrested, you could go to jail, etc., etc. And that's on the extreme case. But I think what we're seeing here is elitism, and we're seeing classism as well, and we're seeing it on a scale that is so polarized that unless we are willing to acknowledge what we're actually seeing, and we're not actually seeing someone having an affair, we're seeing someone having an affair on a public stage in a public office. There are codes, there are ministerial codes that members of parliament have to adhere to. And if they break them, what Boris is telling us is there is no consequence. So how many more skeletons are in the cupboard? And if we're wondering this, I promise you, before the year is done, Dominic Cummings will bring Boris Johnson down. If care is not taken, he will. How many of you remember a member of parliament in the UK called Chuka Umana? He's an Igbo, half Igbo man. And I always really, really adored him. He was a former British politician, and he served as member of parliament for Streatham from 2010 until 2019, and a former member of the Labour Party. He was part of the shadow cabinet from 2011 to 2015. And he was earmarked. He was always, and I say earmarked, but I guess it was always expected that he would eventually run for leadership of the Labour Party. And I remember this because I think it was off the back of the whole Barack Obama thing. And I definitely feel like Chalker was hailed as kind of, hopefully, potentially, could be the first black Prime Minister of the UK. And part of that was, the expectation that he would lead the Labour Party. He was the obvious choice. And I would never ever forget an interview I saw that he did, and he basically said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but you'll catch my drift, that he is not going to run as the leader of the Labour Party because he's not prepared to have the press kind of go into his life and intrude on his life and effectively, put his whole family under the microscope. And at the time, I was really disappointed. I was disappointed because we're talking about an Igbo man here. He's half Igbo, and for us as black people, seeing someone who looks like us, seeing someone who understands where, struggle comes from, you want to see them in that position. You want to see them leading and potentially have a chance at leading the country. And my disappointment came from a lack of understanding. Now I'm a lot older, I completely understand why Chalker wouldn't want to take up that position, because the way this press works, especially towards black people, I definitely feel as though it is a takedown. Any opportunity to take down a black politician in the UK, they're prepared to do it, but they don't do it in the same way, in the same aggressiveness as they do white politicians. And again, it's rooted in racism, and we understand that. But the problem that we're facing is that black politicians in the UK are not afforded the same respect. And whether they want to accept it or not, it is rooted in racism and prejudice. And that prejudice is racism. We're living in a society where we have not seen a black prime minister. At least America has seen a black president. And people will then say, oh, he's not black, he's mixed race. He refers to himself as black, so I'm just saying that and putting it out there. And to that end, it's about trust, isn't it? Suddenly we're seeing members of parliament as human. They have affairs, they cheat on their wives, they get up to naughty things in the office that they shouldn't be doing. It's caught on camera, and we see them now as human, just like us. And I say just like us, but you know what I mean. Like, they are not above mistake. They are not above us. Like, they are human beings. But we have to hold them to a different standard because their code of ethics that they sign up to. And in order for us to have the confidence in them to lead the country, they have to adhere and abide by those ethics. To that end, I do want to talk a little bit, and I did mention it on my Instagram page. How are we then expected to trust the leadership of this country if you have a prime minister that's unwilling to sack members of his cabinet for their indiscretions or breaches of ministerial code. But this is the same government that want us to trust them when they absolve AstraZeneca from any legal liability that comes as a result of the vaccine. Can you see trust is prevalent in kind of how, as a country, we relate to the sitting government? If you're telling us that we need to do certain things and you're not doing them yourselves, or you are not being transparent, the country won't trust you. And for me personally, I don't trust this government. They have broken their own rules. They have been economical with the delivery of what is the truth. You had Boris telling us that the COVID doesn't exist, and he was shaking the hands of COVID patients and then catches COVID himself. And then we have a vaccine that's been released that has no data. There is no actual data in relation to the vaccine. And when I say there's no data that they can reflect on and have some lessons learned or share with the general public, that as a result of the vaccine they have seen certain patterns or identified certain things. What we're hearing is a lot of people sharing, and I've noticed that the press have been very instrumental in the type of information that we get. And if you understand anything about the British press, and if you believe anything that Dominic Cummings says, number one, Boris Johnson allegedly is very obsessed with the press. But equally, I definitely think that the press and the government are in cahoots. So there is a limit to the information that's being communicated. You have to go on social media or go on Clubhouse, which is also a form of social media, to hear what's actually going on with the vaccine. There has been reports that the vaccine actually affects women's menstrual cycles, and there is a social media influencer that has testified that those were her symptoms. You've heard people after the second jab losing their life. There was a lady that was pregnant, and after having the first jab she miscarried, and after having the second jab she died. But all of these things are not being shared, and this is what I have an issue with the government and with information and the lack of transparency with the press, that they're not reporting these things. And then you have the new health secretary who has been appointed to replace Matt Hancock. His name is Sajid Javid. He's the former Chancellor of Exchequer between the 24th of July to the 13th of February. And then he resigned. If you want to go and look at kind of what happened with him, I'll let you go and have a look. This is not a history lesson. He has now replaced Matt Hancock, and he is himself Sajid Javid, the new Health Secretary of the UK, the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. There was a tweet I read, and it's by an MP called Zahara Sultana. Sajid Javid is the new Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, alongside being an MP. Last year, Javid was hired as a paid senior advisor to the US bank of JP Morgan. JP Morgan is a major player in private healthcare. The NHS isn't safe in the Conservatives' hands. Everything I've seen from Sajid Javid has been about completely ignoring the data, and he is all about, right, we need to get back to normal. And this is the problem that I have with this government. And now the new health secretary, you want everything to go back to normal, but the data is saying that we're seeing an increase in COVID infection rates. We've got three active variants. We've got the Delta, and we've got Delta Plus, whatever they're calling it, and we've got the new Nepal variant. And there are reports of concerns about the Delta Plus variant, and obviously there's little known about the Nepal variant, but it has been found here in the UK. I saw, I get these updates from Sky News, and I can't find it right now. Oh, hang on, let me have a look. 22,868 COVID cases and 3 deaths in the last 24 hours. So my thing is, you're going to lift restrictions, and on top of that, you're going to get rid of the 2-metre rule, probably get rid of face masks. I'm just going to put it out here. Everybody needs to be really careful, because no one's got a direct line to COVID. Hi, COVID. Yeah, we need to have a summer. Yeah, because of the economy. We want the economy up, so we're going to sacrifice some lives. So if you wouldn't mind, just take a bit of a break, and you can come back in September. COVID doesn't work like that. one thing about this country is they have short memories, and we know that in the way they treat us as black people and treat ethnic minority groups as well. And we know that they have short memories in the fact that they don't want to talk about racism, don't want to talk about slavery. In fact, they just want to talk about how we can generate money for the economy. And I'm not sitting here and thinking that, or being ignorant of the fact that we need the economy, right? We need to keep the economy thriving, but you can't sacrifice people in exchange for an economy, because there'll be nobody left to create and generate an economy for you. And I definitely feel as though we need to learn from other countries like Australia, like Sydney, who will go on lockdowns, periodic lockdowns. And what happens is that because they deal with COVID in its reality, so when they see a spike in numbers, they put rules up, and they won't necessarily go to lockdown straight away. They'll warn people and give people the opportunity to be safe and adhere to rules, and they'll use like a lockdown as a last attempt or last ditch resort. And it seems to be, helping in flattening the COVID numbers. And I think, was it Sydney that had reports of 0 cases at one time for like a period of 6 weeks, and then they had 1 case of COVID and they went into lockdown or went into restrictions. And I think with this country, we have just been managed as a country, and the healthcare has been managed in such a way that, honestly, I have to agree with Dominic Cummings here. These people don't know what they're doing. And in not knowing what they're doing, innocent lives are being taken, innocent lives are being lost, and we have a government that we don't trust, okay? And we also, as a black woman, I definitely know I don't trust the healthcare system. I can't, because I know how the healthcare system has treated me, and I've spoken about this in a previous podcast and what I've gone through. I have received text messages from my doctor's surgery, so my old doctor's surgery, because I've now moved, and I've received from the NHS directly and letters. These times, I went in for a test in November last year. I couldn't even get my results. I'm even shocked that the NHS know my details, because when I'm trying to access the services by the NHS, I know how many waiting lists I've had to be on. And that's not criticising the amazing nurses and doctors that do an amazing job, but there has to be something said about the waiting lists and how the NHS has been made into a money-making business by the government, rather than kind of taking it back and stripping it back for what it is. We pay our taxes. I know how much I pay in taxes alone, and they show you on the government website how your money has been spent. And I know that a lot of us pay into the healthcare system. The healthcare professionals, like doctors and nurses, are not paid enough at all. I was shocked to find out last year that they have to pay for parking spaces to park at the hospital. I think that is so disgusting. It's diabolical. And then nurses and doctors, and I think it was just nurses, were given an increase of 1%. So after saving the nation, Boris Johnson thinks that what nurses and doctors need are claps. Do you know how insulting that is? Clapping for them. They don't need claps. They need sustainable living. They need to be able to earn a decent wage. They should get free parking to park at hospitals that they work at to save lives. These are the same doctors and nurses that saved Boris Johnson's life when apparently it was hanging by a thread after contracting COVID. And this is the way he repays the doctors and nurses. And I think it's so disgusting. And there is something to be said about karma, and I definitely think that Dominic Cummings is Boris Johnson's karma. And I definitely believe that there is a lot more WhatsApp messages. There's a lot more skeletons coming out of that cabinet. I tell you that now. Did you get the pun? And yeah, I just think Dominic Cummings is really quiet. Do you know what? Who watches Lupin? Lupin? I think Dominic Cummings is like Lupin. The white version of Lupin. And if you don't know what Lupin is, go on Netflix and have a watch. It's spelled Lupin. And he's just like uncharacteristically quiet. So I think we should brace ourselves for a summer of revelation by our very own resident WikiLeaks Dominic Cummings. And if you don't know who Dominic Cummings is, please have a listen to the podcast. The last couple of episodes I have discussed and spoken about him. UK politics here is absolutely crazy. But without going into, deep diving into too much detail about that, I kind of wanted to give my opinion, and I hope, you guys have received my opinion. Now, I'm not into politics massively. I do take a relative interest, because I definitely feel like in terms of voting and things like that, I'm definitely one of those people that will go and vote. My dad, you know, when he was alive, God rest his soul, he was very much that type of person. My dad's always been Labour, 100% Labour. And as a family, we've always been Labour as well. I don't know how I feel about the current leadership. I definitely feel like this is an opportunity for Labour to really step forward and hold the Tory government accountable. Again, I recognise also the climate in which these things are happening. It's in the middle of a global pandemic, and the reality is people are trying to piece together their lives. You know, for the last year, the whole globe has been in a frozen state of despair, dealing with this virus, and the virus isn't going anywhere. It's mutating, and I think the bit that I struggle with is, I'm no scientist, but you're trying to tell me that the vaccines will vaccinate you against all these variants. But my thing is this: the definition of vaccine is effectively a cure, but yet there is actually no cure for COVID-19. In fact, there have been reports of people having the first jab and the second jab and still contracting COVID. And I guess people will turn around and say, well, it's the lesser of two evils. What do you do? Do you not have the vaccine and then contract COVID and then possibly die? But I would then argue and say, well, people die of the flu all the time, right? And not everybody gets the flu jab. And the reality is that we have to also be taught how to look after ourselves with being more healthy, taking vitamin C, especially in our community as Black people. Is it vitamin C or vitamin D? I can't remember. But one of the two we need to be taken, if not both. And also as well, having a healthy diet, losing a bit of weight if we are overweight. I definitely know I'm slightly overweight. Drinking loads of fluids and actually being healthy and having healthier lifestyles. At the end of the day, there are people who have had COVID and who have survived and have lived to tell the tale. But equally, I do think that there has to be something said about being careful about these vaccines and understanding from the data that will come out of these vaccines about the long-term effects. And that's what I'm more interested in, the long-term effects, and the fact that we are being pressured by doctors, the NHS. They're now like converting stadiums into walk-in centres to have the vaccine. It makes me really, really nervous. I definitely recognise as well that we are going to see workplaces move crazy even more than before, because when and if the restrictions are lifted here in the UK on the 19th of July, I think what we're going to see is organisations start to intrude in our personal life by asking us the question, have you been vaccinated? And I do think that we run the risk of this two-tiered system here in the UK of the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. And I think that organisations will potentially feel like they can use the health and safety legislation to determine people's employment, in terms of it's part of health and safety that you have the vaccine. And I would argue you can't tell me to get the vaccine unless you understand, number one, if I have any underlying health issues, and number one, what my current health status is. That would determine whether I would, number one, have the vaccine, or number two, that I'm made aware of the potential side effects. But the point is, everyone's side effects vary, and there's not enough data to discuss side effects depending on people's medical health condition or where they stand from a health perspective. And for me personally, I'm quite happy to share this. As far as I'm concerned, like, I definitely believe in vaccines. I have to, right? Because when I was younger, I had my BCG. When I was a baby, I had all the vaccines as I was growing up. You know, the ones for chicken pox. Is it chicken pox or mumps? Anyway, I had my vaccines when I was younger. However, as a fully logical adult, I definitely think that as a woman, with the plans that I have for my body and what I want to do and how I choose to live my life, there is just not enough data to support any decision to or not to have the vaccine. And as far as I'm concerned, the current vaccine is still at testing stage, i.e. we are the test. And it's from us that they're going to get that data. So I'm prepared to wait to understand what the data says, how it affects, how potentially it could affect me. I already suffer from really heavy periods, right? I have mild PCOS, and At one stage, the doctors thought I had endometriosis, which again, they don't know whether I have it or not. And I actually don't think I have endo. But the fact that I potentially have some underlying health issues, no doctor can tell me how I will react to any of the vaccines. And partly is because there's not enough data to support any proposition. Therefore, I'm prepared to be patient and wait. And I'm prepared to understand the long-term effects of the COVID vaccine. Because no one can tell me, for example, if I had a heart condition, how that would affect me. And we've had a lot of people that have really, really bad side effects from the vaccine and still experiencing that. And I think from a workplace position, that is the position I take. Unless you can assure me that I will not have XYZ issues because of my underlying health issues or potential health issues, I'm not prepared to have a vaccine that's still being trialled and awaiting data. And I would confront any organisation that would determine my employment based on whether I'm vaccinated. It's discriminatory in nature, and they can't mandate it. They can't make it, legal or part of their policy. They can seek to put pressure on you, 100%. They can seek to threaten you. And this is why the Toy Talks podcast exists, because it's important that you understand what your rights are as an employee, as a contractor, as a fixed-term contract employee. And I hope that the platform that has been created to benefit Black women, that you get that information in terms of how you can best navigate the world of work, number one, but navigate it through this current climate of the pandemic. And there has been people that have reached out to me where organisations have put out like an email blast. For example, there was a young lady, and they basically said in her organisation, you have to respond back and declare whether you have been vaccinated or not. And they had this spiel about making sure you protect your colleagues and that they're going to move to a hybrid system. And a hybrid system is where they may work from home twice a week and 3 days a week they're in the office. So she wrote to me and she said, Toya, I don't feel comfortable disclosing my medical information. And I said, well, you don't have to. There's nothing in your employment contract or any form of contractual engagement that you have with your employer that says that you have to declare your health status, because that's what you're basically doing. And the question I would ask is, well, you might as well ask me if I've been vaccinated against other things as well, and not just the COVID-19. Anyway, we put a letter together. I drafted a letter for her, and I attached some stats in terms of the side effects of people who have had similar health conditions, so she's asthmatic and things like that. And I said that they have to tell her or confirm to her what the possible side effects would be if she got the COVID vaccine, because it would be based on what they recommend will determine what she does. And obviously organisations don't want to be on the hook of forcing or seen to be pressuring someone to have the vaccine. They want to pressure you, but they don't want to be seen to be doing it. So they won't respond. And they kept trying to call her on Teams. And I was like, no, they have to put it in an email. Anyway, there was a lot of back and forth, and the young lady listened, and everything I asked her to put down in writing, she did. And also she got confirmation from her doctor that they couldn't confirm what her side effects would be. And then the organisation had to retract the email blast asking people to determine their vaccination status, because you can't do things like that. Okay, you can't. It's a form of discrimination, because if I tell you I haven't been vaccinated, how does that affect my role? And if you're unwilling to tell me that, I can only take from that there will be a negative consequence. And my health status and my vaccination status was not determined on my employment. That was not the reason you hired me. It wasn't a question or a prerequisite question for my employment. Now, when you start going down that road, they don't know what to do. You're dealing with human resources managers often that are just doing what they're told by an organisation. Often organisations think that they don't need to follow the letter of the law, partly because some of them are aggrieved that people have been working from home. Organisations are yet to understand that productivity has been at an all-time high whilst we have been working from home. We've been working longer hours as well, right? Because we are working from the comfort of our home. But equally as well, a lot of organisations has been able to thrive from working remotely. I definitely think that from an organisational perspective, it means that you can have the best of the best talent in your organisation, because you're just not restricted to domestic talent. So talent in your locality, you can have talent from all over the world as long as they can work remotely. I can be very clear with you that my status is remote worker, and I will be remote worker for the foreseeable. I don't see in my line of work, in my profession, and in what I do, why I need to be in anyone's office. And I definitely feel like there is less stress of being in the office. I don't have to do cheap small talk. I don't have to pretend to like rich tea biscuits and dunk them into my coffee. I don't have to do the uncomfortable small talk in the kitchen. I don't have to worry about my body language, and if I blink too fast you might think I'm giving you a dirty look. I ain't got no time for that. Put it this way, look at all the politics that we're having to deal with remotely in comparison to the politics you'd have to do face to face as well. And I understand that to an extent working from home is a luxury for some, and I recognise not all organisations or not all professionals can be remote, but I think where you can, this is a great opportunity to negotiate your employment contract to be remote or hybrid if you prefer a hybrid model, and determine what that hybrid model looks like. I definitely think that organisations that are moving to a more hybrid model are partly accepting the fact that they don't need staff in 100% of the time. I think it's an opportunity for organisations to downsize their estate. So if you imagine organisations spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on offices, and actually some organisations were doing a bit of remote working, i.e. they didn't have enough desks for the amount of staff to force people to work from home where they could. But I understand also that you have unhealthy management styles of micromanagement, and those micromanagers have been in turmoil for the last year because they haven't been able to torment their members of staff, and have been doing so remotely by demanding daily or 3 times daily calls and stuff like that. So I definitely think that where some organisations may be a bit more relaxed about a hybrid model or complete work from home, you're always going to have those managers that for no reason that makes actual sense, they're going to want you in the office. And I think we need to start leveraging the pandemic. I think a lot of you have missed a trick here, where I think we or you or I, however you want to say it, don't recognise the power as employees that we actually have. And I think part of it is rooted in fear. You know, we have this intrinsic fear of not wanting to rock the boat so that we don't lose our jobs. But the tables have turned, the tide is changing, and I really want you to use the Toy Talks platform to your advantage, because it's for you, it's for us, it's for black women, to advance black women in the world of work, because for far too long we have remained very, very, very oppressed, and the only time we see any success is as the token one. We have to move past that now. We have to get to a point whereby our employment starts to make sense for us. Listen, if there is anything that you have learned is the way the employment market works, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in, and I'm talking public sector, private sector, corporate, charity sector, retail sector, whatever sector you work in, we have seen a shift in employment. We have seen, like, during the first phases of the pandemic, the job market like dried up because organisations didn't understand what was happening. They didn't want to spend money, you know. Also as well, you know, a lot of organisations were reluctant to remain remote. They kept thinking every week they're going to go back in the office. And then organisations started to adapt to the changing world of work, where suddenly interviews were remote, and that was just normal. Video conferencing increased. So we saw a move from Skype to Teams to the evolution of so many video conferencing platforms. And then we saw employment agencies also move to that model too. And then we just adapted, organisations adapted to this new climate of working. So people were being hired remotely. I know for me and my contract, I was hired remotely. I've never seen anybody I work with in the flesh. Anybody. But that's fine. You can still have a team-like spirit remote. And I definitely do also accept that people who are new to the working world are missing out on you know, the world of work and what it means. I do think that there is a benefit of being in the office to learn from people around you, and it's just like conversations that I had at work about work, and you pick that up. I think me, who is like the seasoned professional, I don't need to be in an office space, and I learn from many different things from many different experiences whilst working remotely. And sometimes it could just be an email that I've never thought of before, or the content of an email that I was like, oh, I never thought that, people learn to adapt. And I think we need to give ourselves credits as humans that we will adapt. And what we need to do is learn. And this is the problem that we have as a society, the inability to learn. We have taught Oyibo people to wash their hands for 20 seconds. 20 seconds. I'm telling you, July 19th, some of these people will use the toilet and come out and then go down to the canteen and eat sandwich with their dirty hands. Yeah. We don't learn. We don't understand boundaries. Like, listen, you're working in organisations where maybe you didn't set the boundaries from the get-go, but remote working has enabled you to set those boundaries. Then you're going to go back in the office, and some of you will not learn. You'll soon forget everything that this pandemic has taught us. We have learned that we can be absolutely awesome at our jobs, whether we're in the office or outside the office. We've saved a lot of money, some of us, or at least understood how much money is spent on transport getting into work. So now I would think that when you are looking at organisations, or if you've decided to be 100% remote, I'm not renegotiating a salary to accommodate for the fact that I'm not travelling, because you're still using electricity in your house. You still have to eat. You're still using water. Do you understand? Like, let us understand the position as employees, as consultants, as whatever it is we are. Let's understand the position and the leverage that we have with these organisations. The tide has turned. The tide has turned. And I'm going to tell you this. If organisations think for a moment that they can discriminate against people who are not being vaccinated and therefore compromise people's employment, they're going to find themselves in an employment tribunal. And a lot of these organisations will find people who will walk away. Let us not forget the most important thing, that it is your choice. And choice seems to be ripped away from us, or society is attempting to rip away choice. And I need to put choice firmly back in our bosoms. It is our choice whether we want to be vaccinated. It's your choice whether you want to stay employed by this employer or you want to look for pastures new. It's your choice if you decide to settle for crumbs of an organisation. You have to get to a point where you understand that it's okay to choose yourself. What is in your best interest? I remember a young lady, she sent me a message on a DM on Instagram, and she said, Toya, because of your platform, I've gone from being a perm member of staff to renegotiating a fully 100% remote contract, and now I work from Dubai and Zanzibar. Come on. So I share these things with you because it's the realm of possibility. Like, you can't say, oh, I won't be able to do this if you haven't allowed yourself to accept the possibility. And the possibility comes from other Toya Talks listeners who share positively their experiences or how they've used the platform to renegotiate a contract or navigate difficult situations that have yielded positive outcomes. This is how we learn. And we have to, I learn from you guys all the time. All the time. At the end of the day, in as much as I navigated very extremely successfully in the world of work, in predominantly white spaces, there are still things to learn. And I will continue to be a student of life, as we all should. But equally, I don't think we should walk away from this pandemic, if we can walk away from it, without taking the learnings that positively have a positive effect on us. And I think we need to start being more graceful to ourselves. What is it that you need out of your employer or your organisation? And maybe what you need is not best served in your current organisation. I know for a fact that any contract, and I mean any contract, I have after my current contract, number one, remote working is a must. Number two, I want to understand how organisations adapted to the pandemic. How soon after the rules and the restrictions set by the government, how long did it take your organisation to react, and how did you adapt? What does the current work status look like? Did you have to downsize your estate? This allows me to know how adaptable and amenable an organisation was to the pandemic. An organisation that says to me, we still left our doors open and we had 2 or 3 people who needed to come in I've got a problem with you, because you should have adhered to the letter of the restrictions and ensured that your members of staff had what they needed to work from home. Listen, I've got a friend who has an organisation, who works in an organisation, and there was a young lady who had started there. She hadn't even been there 2 months, and she had issues with her internet. Obviously, she didn't have an internet set up for purely remote working. So she told her boss, she was honest, she was like, I need to get a higher speed internet, this, that and the third. Do you know that the organisation gave her extra money each month so that she could increase her bandwidth on her internet to enable her to work from home? There are certain packages organisations can give you. It's about, number one, whether they want to, but number two, whether you're willing to challenge them to see if they will. Listen, this is why I tell you, if you are the subject matter expert in what you do, if you deliver, and often when you start in organisations, it's not clear whether you can deliver to them. You just know you can, but you should know what you're entitled to. And you have to have a walk away point. There has to be a point in your mind, number one, where you do your due diligence enough and do an assessment enough to understand whether this organisation is right for you. But you ask up front all the things that you want. And when I was talking about the interview masterclass in previous episodes, I talk about this. Like, the interview masterclass isn't just about acing your interview. It's also about managing an interview so that you are also able to do your due diligence on an organisation, and certain pertinent questions that you should be asking at interview stage. And the answers should then allow you to make an informed decision about whether this organisation is the type of organisation you want to work at. Listen, we're not desperate anymore. We are not desperate for roles. You can't be desperate anymore for a role unless your CV isn't where it needs to be. Then I've got the CV masterclass on the toytalk.com website. So I'm giving you the tools. But more than I've ever seen in my entire career, we are seeing a shift towards the benefit of employees to leverage the position. If you are able to get a job in the pandemic, do you know that there's a power in that? Do you know that there's a strength in that? There was a need for your skills by that organisation, that they were willing to hire you remotely. Organisations were sending laptops by DPD and DHL. These times, before, we couldn't even get anything from our organisations, talk less of them investing in their IT. And then part of that investment of the IT is upgrading their IT systems to make sure that we had the adequate equipment to work from home, and then using a courier service to make sure we get it. Organisations weren't doing that before. What? These times when we used to have to go to work to drop off a doctor's note, or if we needed something from the office, they'll tell us, oh, come at so-and-so time. They weren't using couriers for us. Look at how the world is changing. Are you adapting? Dear Black women, are we adapting to the way society is now, the way the workplace is now? Are we adapting? Are you taking it full advantage and utilising the current pandemic? How have you assessed whether this organisation is the right organisation for you? How has this organisation treated you through this pandemic? How? And I'm telling you now, for every bad organisation, there's 5 good ones, or 5 bearable ones at least, that are willing to meet you where you are and give you what you want. If you're able to deliver on the skills that you have, number one. Number 2, you're able to excel in the interview process. And number 3, you're willing to negotiate. A lack of negotiation with your employer, current or impending, is what will determine how you engage with organisations, or how you engage with your organisation. How flexible your organisation is going to be determined on what you request. Have you managed to carve out leverage for yourself? These are the things that you need to ask yourself. So when I get messages from people that tell me, oh, you know what, Toya, but it's different for you. You've been working for a long time, but I started just like you guys. And I'm still navigating. It doesn't matter if I've been working for a long time. As a Black woman, I'm still navigating just like you. Just like you. But I'm a living proof of the example that I set. I will never tell you guys to do something that I've not done. I would never do that. But more importantly, I'm giving you the tools through the podcast to be able to be better than me. You kidding me? Can you imagine if there was a Toy Talks platform when I was younger? Jesus Christ, I'd be a CEO and be a non-exec or an executive of many, many boards. I tell you that now. So before we draw this episode to a close, I need to tell you something that happened on Tuesday, and I made reference to it a little bit earlier. So Tuesday is when I upload the podcast, and I set the time for the upload. It's usually about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And then obviously on Tuesday, you know, I work, I remote work. You guys know I'm a consultant. So last week, Wednesday, the risk department raised a risk about one of my contracts. And as part of them raising this risk, I had to interrogate the risk and understand and be satisfied that I, as the commercial contracts consultant, is happy that the information that I'm being given, the due diligence has been done. So because of the level of risk, it was actually really, really high risk. The risk team presented it to me, and I said to them, I'm going to have a conversation with the supplier, and then I'm going to speak to my boss, Deborah. So I took that away, spoke to Deborah, we had a conversation, and Deborah was really happy with my approach. I gave her my commercial view, and she was quite happy with it. And she says, Toya, listen, I trust your judgment. Thank you for letting me know. Because also as well, because of the gravity of the risk, I knew that at her level, at her director level, it may come up in conversation, and I don't want her to kind of be caught unaware. So for me, it was worth having that brief chat with her. So in terms of what my approach was going to be, I informed the risk team, and I told them that it's been supported by my boss. So the person that presented the risk, his name was Nicholas. And I gave him an update of how we are going to manage it. And then I gave him some like milestones of kind of what the plan of action was going to be. And he sent me an email, Nicholas, he sent me an email back, and he says, you know, that they're disappointed that they're not involved in the process, but he thinks that I'm taking a professional approach. And in my head, I was like, all right, whatever. So you can then imagine then on Tuesday, podcast has been updated, I'm logging on for work. I get an email from Nicholas's manager, Sandeep. Sandeep says to me he says in the email, I am baffled that you would take this approach and you would not talk to my team. And then he started writing in capitals, and then he @s me. So he calls me out. So in the email that Sandeep has then written, on that email is my boss, my boss's boss, and my boss's boss's boss, 3 bosses up, and all the directors. So we're talking about people who I've heard of and probably never met before. And on the face of it, if you were to read Sandeep's email in isolation, you would think, who is this young lady? Who is this Toya? Who does she think she is? Type thing. Do you know what I mean? So then, I then send Sandeep an email that I'd sent to Nicholas on the Wednesday. And in that email, it's really clear about the steps and how I'm engaging Sandeep's team, remembering that Nicholas is a direct report to Sandeep, and Nicholas is the one that raised the risk to me. And I attach the email that I'd sent to Nicholas, which clearly Sandeep had no visibility of. But before I had sent that email, my boss's boss's boss, so 2 bosses up, sends an email to me saying, Toya, I agree with Sandeep that this approach does not involve Sandeep's team and da-da-da. And in my head, I'm like, I've involved the team. Like, what are you talking about? So then as I send the email to Sandeep, clearly with a summary of my approach, and then I also attached Nicholas's email acknowledging my approach and actually saying it's a professional approach, and I actually quoted it in an email. I said, your team are fully appraised, because this word appraised seemed to be your buzz word of choice. Your team are fully appraised of my strategy, and actually it's been co-signed by your direct report, Nicholas. And actually, to go as far as that, I have been able to deliver on a couple of these milestones to mitigate the risk, but more importantly, my boss is aware. So my boss's boss's boss, 2 bosses up, Michael, he calls me on Teams. Because at this point, he's obviously embarrassed because he's supported Sandeep's email, not realising that actually I've already had a conversation with Sandeep's team. If Sandeep's team haven't told him, that's not my problem. So Michael called me and he said, Toya, I've just read the email and I didn't want the emails to go back and forth, but I think you've done a brilliant job. I've just read your email. I didn't realise that you had updated Nicholas and therefore Nicholas should have told Sandeep. And actually, your review of it was absolutely fantastic, this, that and the third. I said, well, listen, I'm quite happy to have a collaborative approach, but ultimately I have to manage the risk because I am the lead with this particular contract. And whilst I understand they're doing their job, equally, they brought it to me because they knew I could do something about it. But what I can't do is allow them access to my supplier before we have collectively done some due diligence and I'm satisfied that actually the report is as it is. Do you understand that it's been justified and quantified, to make sure that we've done what we need to do, and I'm satisfied with that. He said, no, that's what we pay you for at the end of the day. We trust you to bring your expertise. So then later on that day, I rang my boss because I knew that she didn't read the email, and I told her. She said to me, did Michael put this down in an email after he spoke to you? I said, no. I said, he just called me. She goes, so the last email is him basically agreeing with Sandeep. It's not him then doubling back to actually agree with you because Sandeep's made himself look like a fool. So I said to my boss, there is more than one way to skin a cat. At the end of the day, I've done everything I'm supposed to. And Sandeep calling me out in an email, him being very rude, disrespectful and sarcastic in the email, actually polarizes his own ignorance and actually also polarizes the lack of communication between him and his direct report, Nicholas. I don't need to justify myself to Sandeep. Nicholas does. My boss laughed. And she said, don't worry. If you need me, I'm here. I said, no problem. So after doing my due diligence based on what Nicholas had presented to me as a risk, there were so many holes in their report. So on Friday, I did a robust response, having done all the things that I said I was going to do, but actually holes in their report. So you've escalated it to my boss's boss's boss. You've got all the directors on copy. 2 of the shareholders are on copy too, by the way. And you just sought to humiliate me in front of people I didn't even know. But whether I knew them or not is by the by. You sent me an email to tell me you're baffled and absolutely flabbergasted. Do you understand? And then you're making the risk sound bigger than what it is, that I'm bringing the organisation and the company into disrepute because I'm not actually acting according to what you want me to do. But that's not the right way to do things. So what I did was, I screenshot, anyway, Michael calling me and how long the call took. I made reference, I sent an email to one of my colleagues referencing the call from Michael. But I need an audit trail. I ain't got time for this. That one went in the burn folder. When I replied to Sandeep and Nicholas on Friday, do you know that email was so deliciously tantalizing? In fact, I absolutely demolished their report. You know when you say demolished, I came with stats. I came with figures. You know that type of delivery, The way that email was delivered. Do you know that my boss's boss sent me an email and she said, excellent email, Toya. This woman was on annual leave, by the way. My boss's boss sent me an email, excellent email. One of the other directors, Toya, this email is absolutely fantastic. Thank you for doing your job diligently. And you know, one of the shareholders sent me an email and he said, Toya, I thought this was a risk, but I can see that this is just business as usual. And he copied everybody in. As I'm talking to you today, do you think Sandeep has come back to me? Do you think Nicholas has come back to me? No. The reason why I want to share that with you is there's a reality that I want to share. And if I'm being completely honest, even though I'm senior in my organisation, there is a vulnerability that I feel each and every day. And that vulnerability is no matter how senior I am, there are people who are threatened by the mere existence of a black woman, not only bossing the job, but knowing what I'm doing. They, when we work in some of these organisations, they underestimate us to a point where they actually think we're stupid. And this is the reason why they choose violence all the time. And they enjoy the opportunity to try and make us look stupid. But this is what I say to you. Being a subject matter expert doesn't mean you have to know everything. You just have to be a safe pair of hands who knows what they're doing. In being that, in embodying that, in knowing that we have to be top tier, there is a limit to how exposed we will be. So if we know that we're vulnerable, now we expose ourselves if we don't know what we're doing and we're not good at our job. In order to be good at your job, you have to devote yourself and dedicate yourself to understanding what you do. Being a student of life and allowing yourself to experience things, especially when you're in a position to learn. Do you understand? I didn't wake up one morning and become a commercial contract consultant. I had to learn a lot of things on the job, the foundation of which, I had my law degree, I went to law school, I've got my master's in law. That was amazing. But that's all theoretical. The practical came from the world of work, working in different organisations, really pushing myself to work in organisations that, honestly, when I look back, I don't know how I managed to navigate, but I did. Because the blueprint of white oppressive constructs are all the same wherever you go. It's just about degree. But what Sandeep did, what he did, is he sought to humiliate me in front of shareholders. He sought to humiliate me in front of directors, just to show me who's boss. And this is why I tell you, you see this Bay melting pot, I've told you in previous episodes, it's dangerous. It's dangerous because it seeks to place us all in the same pot. But we know for a fact that Asian people, especially in the workplace, they see us as beneath them. You have to call it out. When it's smelling, say it smells. When it's bad, say it's bad. Stop us. We need to stop massaging how we talk. We have to stop massaging. And this is why I said I have to tell you, this platform is for black women. Because in the pecking order of choice, we are placed at the bottom. Asian people think they're above us. And Asian people see white people as above them. Do you understand? So, and when I say we are considered at the bottom of the pecking order, above us are black men. Do you understand? And what he did, what Sandeep did, it was like a chess move. But what he didn't realise is that I'm a knight. He didn't realise I'm a knight. And my boss is the queen of the deck. You see, of the chessboard, my boss is the queen. And now it makes sense to me. Do you remember last week I told you guys that there was this one guy who was trying to cut me out of emails? It was to do with this thing. And the reason why my boss got so angry at him, my boss is a black woman and she knows that she's vulnerable. She knows. And she knows that I mitigate that vulnerability. So when there are things to do with the contracts that I look after, she trusts me to be a safe pair of hands. So where she is ordinarily vulnerable, I make sure that she is not. Because remember, I'm only as good as I'm valuable to my boss if I make her look good as well. Like, there is an element of that, let's really be honest. But because of the gravity of what was pointed out by Nicholas's team, headed up by Sandeep, it was really, 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 really important that I was on top of it. So when my boss saw that there was an act to deliberately keep me away or to keep things away from me, my boss wasn't going to have it, because in keeping those things away from me, it makes her more vulnerable and exposes her too. So she needs me to be able to have full visibility to do my job, so that I can mitigate those risks, continue to make her look good, but more importantly, ensure that she's not made vulnerable. Do you understand the dynamic here and the things at play. You know, when I'm navigating, I'm very aware of the fact that, for example, when they see me, I make them uncomfortable. Because for them, number one, they can't work anything out. They don't know my age. They don't know anything about me. I don't share. So if you were to tell them that I'm getting married, I'm engaged, they'd be shocked. Because I don't talk about my personal life. I understand how best to navigate these people. I understand how I need to navigate them to be able to get what I want out of this organisation, to be able to continue to work there, but more importantly, to ensure that I do my job to the best of my ability. And I can't be across everything. At the end of the day, I'm sure there are underhanded things happening all the time. But it's about when I'm confronted with, people who are deliberately choosing violence in their interaction with me, how do I handle it? That audience of that email, you're emailing me to tell me that you're baffled and all of these things, to basically say to me your decision is stupid and actually you're exposing this company to risk. And if you're exposing this company to risk, you are causing a problem. Do you know what it means to @ somebody in an email? You know when you @ their name? Like on Instagram when you @ me. Imagine @ing me in an email with an audience of seniors that, to be honest, I can't even tell you what some of them look like because I don't know them. I just know their names. And some of them, I don't even know their name. You just know that they're seniors. And that was the audience that you wanted to humiliate me. Okay, cool. Luckily for me, I had already done a summary email on that on the Wednesday or the Thursday. That was acknowledged by Nicholas's team. But when he went to Sandeep, he probably went to Sandeep, Toya's not doing, she's not doing this, she's not doing this. And then he took it upon himself to come and be fee, fi, fo, fum. And then I made him look stupid because I sent an update to your team and your team even acknowledged it. So how am I cutting out your team? How am I not taking this seriously? I've told you the steps I'm going to take and I'm taking them. And I've further spoken to my boss who supports this recommendation. So what's up? Can you see why it's important in the workplace to cover yourself? And you better believe that Sandeep, that email has gone in the burn folder. You better believe it. Sandeep's time is numbered. I've reported him to my ancestors. You'll see it. You will say I told you so. I put it in. There's a way to professionally humiliate somebody when they draw for you and choose violence. As black women, whether we want to accept this or not, they don't want to see us there. They do not want to see us. And if we are going to be there, they think we're going to be there on their terms. If this was 20-year-old Toya, I probably would be so upset. I'd probably be emailing him, I'm so sorry. Apologising, not because I'm in the wrong, but because I'm trying to keep my job. No, I'm not going to apologise to you. I haven't done anything wrong. And even if I'm going to apologise to you, even if I've done something wrong, do you have to humiliate me in an audience of seniors who I do not know? Humiliate me in front of shareholders? Who the hell do you think you are? And then he ended up with not only egg, tomato, and cheese on his face. He ended up looking like a fool to a point where you can't even respond to my email again. Where is your baffling? Stupid. That's how I dealt with that. So I have a follow-up call with Nicholas, and I've made sure that in that follow-up call with Nicholas, I have admin assistant who's going to be taking minutes. You're not going to get me in a meeting anymore without minute taker. As I've got a minute taker, at the end of that meeting, the minute taker will send you a summary with the minutes. You cannot be trusted. It's really important for us to understand how we cover our own backs during the course of our employments in terms of when we're doing the work that we're employed to do, if that makes sense. You can't think of everything, but you need to cover your back and cover all bases. As somebody who is dyslexic, I definitely know that to-do lists, I need a to-do list. I put reminders in my calendar. If there's key dates or milestones, I put them in my calendar. I'm always, if you see my desk, I've got post-it notes. Whatever it is that I can use to help me do my job. There is a topic to be had. There's a podcast to be had about the tools you need to do your job, especially as somebody who has a learning difficulty. And I will always want to advocate and be the voice of people who have learning disabilities and actively in the world of work navigating successfully, or those people who are entering the world of work or currently in the throes of work and are lacking in confidence because of our learning disability. And I've spoken about it in a previous episode. If you look in the episodes about my dyslexia, I don't share it with anyone I work with. They don't need to know I'm dyslexic. But that's just my personal choice. And I know dyslexia is about degree. For some people, they need like adjustments to the way they work and stuff. I don't need adjustments. I had to learn through the hard way. And I've shared that previously on a previous podcast. But I understand how I learn now, and I lean into how I learn to make sure I do my job in the best way I can. And I recognise that sometimes, you know, my dyslexia plays a role in how I send emails. Like, you know, I have to always check my emails about 10 times before I send it. You know, I have to make notes. I've got certain notebooks and I have to write in specific notebooks. And I know it sounds strange, but I think when I do a podcast on how I do my job from a kind of, from the lens of somebody with a learning disability, or from the lens of somebody who is struggling to keep up with the pace, because there has to be something to be said about pace of an organisation, especially when you finish from school, right? And then, or education, and you go into the world of work, pace. Some organisations, the pace is so fast and you're expected almost to know everything. Death by acronym. Every organisation has acronyms. And I definitely think that we need to give ourselves grace of adapting. We have to adapt to where we're working. Part of your due diligence is understanding how an organisation kind of turns over work. You know, like when I say turnover, like how the pace of an organisation, every organisation is different. I've worked in places before where the pace is so slow, if you respond to an email too soon, they see that as aggressive. I've worked in organisations before where the pace is so fast that if you blink, you'll miss something. And I've worked for organisations where the pace is quick, but the expectation is just that I deliver, and the need for organisation. And luckily for me, part of my dyslexia requires organisation. Like, I have to be organised, I have to know what I'm doing, I have to put reminders, because I am quite a forgetful person as well. And also, you know, how you interpret emails that have been sent to you. You know, maybe somebody's asked you to do a piece of work and it's not clear. Understanding what questions to ask or how to ask those questions. How to construct emails is something that I've learned during the course of my world of work. And how to, you know, some people are just sensitive, but I recognise that good morning Jessie, good morning Sarah, I hope you are well, and then you go to the next paragraph and then you ask your question. I really hate when people send me email, they just say Toya, comma, and then I don't like that. I find that quite aggressive, but I don't have to respond in that way. And professionalism is so important. I am so professional at work that I, in the same breath, even though I'm really, really professional, I will equally respond to you in an email and professionally tear your singlet and tear your pants. But yeah, I kind of want to leave it there. I wanted to share that. I definitely know that a lot of you were interested to hear my views on Matt Hancock, so I definitely wanted to deliver this podcast, and I hope you guys have learned from this podcast episode. I think what's really important, I believe, is that even from a politician perspective, people make mistakes. I doubt very much that Matt Hancock embarked on his affair with the intention to hurt his family. I think for whatever reason he is doing what he's doing, but it's more about how we see these politicians and how we see our managers, how we see directors, how we see our shareholders and the senior leadership team. They're humans. Do you know how many of your bosses are having affairs with some of your colleagues? Oh, I've got stories for you. Do you know how many of your colleagues have had a bit of a naughty outside the toilet? You don't know. You don't know. Some of these skeletons in the cupboards are scary. The things that people will do to get to the top, and that top we're talking is to increase the earning potential, to get a promotion. Don't worry, I've got those stories coming for you. Some people are nasty. And if there is anything that we are learning from the government here in the UK, is that they're human beings. Your managers, your line managers, Directors, they're all human beings, and they don't often stick to the rules that they create. And this is why, as black women navigating the world of work, we have to rub shoulders with the policies, our contracts, and actually the things that govern our employment. Because some of these people, some of these organizations, they create all these rules and regulations, all these policies. Some of them don't even remember it again. And it's for you to use them to your benefit. If you don't understand how to navigate the world of work, or you know somebody who doesn't, please give them the podcast. I know this podcast is not only saving lives, but educating our fellow black queens how to navigate the world of work successfully, and in turn, light up the path of their success. And success, as I always say, is attainable to each and every one of us. It's about whether we're ready to stand up and show up as ourselves and understand that there is a lot of podcast listeners that just want to be accepted. Just as simple as that. They just want to be accepted. But whilst racism, oppression, discrimination exists, sometimes acceptance is hard. And you are looking at the powers, the people that have the power to accept. And my question to you is, what is it that you're lacking that you need acceptance from them? When you know that on a daily basis, some of these people choose violence. Imagine Tuesday, 10 a.m, you're sending me an email and you're atting me. So you're calling me out. You're actually calling me out. Some of these people, their violence start at 9 a.m. 9 a.m. on a Monday morning. It's not about acceptance. At that point, it's about understanding how you're going to navigate. And often, it means you have to literally let them know, or you have to let them know that you're not unwilling to accept that behaviour. You have to let them know by, number one, building your burn folder. If you're not building your burn folder, I don't know what you're doing. You're sleeping on a bicycle. You have to cover yourself in being a subject matter expert, doing your due diligence, your burn folder, your feedback folder. Listen, all these emails, they're telling me, oh, excellent email. This is brilliant. I have a feedback folder for all of that. All of that. You can't ever come to me and tell me, about my performance, because you're going to have to explain all these hundreds of emails that I've gotten. You're going to have to explain all these emails that I've received from senior stakeholders right up to directors. Do you understand? You have to start building the story and narrating the story that you want for yourself. Because I always say this, Oyobo people, as I have previously said, they've got short memories. You're only as great as your last success story in the organisations that I've worked in previously. So it's important that I have a dossier of remembrance so they can remember all my achievements when I was amazing and my farts were smelling like roses. Now you're telling me I'm the worst of the worst. It's not, there's no, what's the pattern here? And the thing is, they never remember when you're great, they always remember when you're bad. They're able to, you didn't do this, or you did it like this, or somebody thought you were rude. This whole rudeness business, I suffered from it in my 20s, and one day I challenged it. I said, you're rude. You think I'm rude. That's your general interpretation. But my question to you is, my rudeness that you're qualifying as rude, who are you using as a comparator? You yourself, I consider you rude as well because of the way. But why is it that my rudeness is measured at a different level to everybody else's? Is it rooted in a prejudice, a preconceived idea? I said it. When you challenge them, they don't like it. White people don't like to be called racist. They don't like the word race. They don't want you to even mention oppression. Because then we're starting to really shake the foundation of what is comfortable for them. So if you're going to go into white spaces or non-black spaces, you better have your shit in order. And understand that as black women, we are vulnerable. We are vulnerable because if you understand the way power structures work, we don't have the power. We don't have privilege and we don't have fragility. That makes us vulnerable. What gives us strength is how we protect ourselves through the burner folder, to understand our contract, our policies, all of that. Everything that I teach here is what arms us to be able to navigate. And you have to understand that success is not rooted in oppression, for us. Our success has to be breaking down the barriers that seek to oppress us. I'll leave you with that thought. If you want to follow me on social media, my social media handles, my Twitter handle is Toya_W, hashtag Toya Talks, hashtag Toya Talks podcast. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I'm very, very, very active on Instagram, my personal Instagram page, Toya_Washington. So I always upload on my stories, I post, make sure you follow me. Or the Toya Talks podcast Instagram page, which is Toya_Talks. If you want to follow me on Clubhouse, it's Toya Washington, all one word. We have our own club on Clubhouse called Toya Talks. I will be hosting a room. Can you please look out for it on social media, especially Instagram. I will post when I'm actually going to host a room, and I'll base it on one of the podcast episodes. I might even do one this week, actually. Keep a lookout on my Instagram page and wait to hear that announcement. Also, as well, I do want to announce, for those of you who attended Toya Talks Live back in 2018, it was a sold out live event. It sold out within 72 hours. I think it was like 250 capacity. And we had a Toya Talks Live, and I literally brought Toya Talks to the live stage. And we were supposed to have a Toya Talks event last year. Unfortunately, it was cancelled due to the pandemic. I'm planning to do a Toya Talks Live next year, 2022. It will be a ticket event. Those people who purchased tickets last year and I had to cancel the event, they will be offered the right of first refusal to the tickets. However, I am hoping to have a bigger venue, so there'll be enough tickets for everybody. But once the tickets are gone, they're gone. So I would urge you to follow me on social media for when that announcement will be for the ticket release, which may be later on this year, I don't know. And also, if you want to follow me on Snapchat, my Snapchat handle is Toya Washington, all one word. And Snapchat is very special to me because it was the birthplace of Toya Talks. And it's really important for me that you guys engage in my social media pages, because there are things that I talk about, especially like on Instagram stories, that, you know, I talk about off the cuff. And you get more of a flavour of my personality, I think, on Instagram. So make sure you follow me on social media. Also this week, I will be doing a presentation to a CEO of a really big organisation about Toya Talks. They are hoping to engage the Toya Talks platform in educating their staff on race relations, equality, diversity and inclusion. So we're going to have what will be for them a very difficult conversation, because also I saw some of the publications they did for Black Lives Matter, and I'm holding them accountable. If you want me to come on board as a consultant, we need to start from the uncomfortable conversation. We need to define what the roadmap is going to be, and we need to be, and they need to be proactive about what inclusivity looks like. And I'm very, very clear that my platform is to Black women, for Black women, about Black women. And obviously the people from different backgrounds access the platform, but I choose Black women first because we're not often chosen first, if at all. So to be given an opportunity to do a presentation for a CEO is absolutely huge. I can't wait to deliver that. And I will say to you all as well, if you want me to come into your organisations, I recognise that whilst I'm giving you the tools here on the Toya Talks podcast, there is some work to be done from the inside of your organisations. So if your organisations are looking to change their structures and the way their organisation is structured in terms of race, equality, inclusion, diversity, I am your girl. The Toya Talks platform is there. Make sure you direct them to the Toya Talks website, which is www.toyatalks.com. Of course, my email address is hello@toyatalks.com. You guys also know, if you have any work-related dilemmas, email hello@toyatalks.com. Your anonymity will be protected. We'll share the dilemma here on the Toya Talks podcast. I'll give you advice, and hopefully, by the grace of God, we'll be able to help you with your dilemma. If you want to access any of the masterclasses, which are 10 out of 10 top tier, if I may say so myself, CV masterclass, interview skills, redundancy, mother and daughter masterclass, and negotiation, all available on the toyatalks.com website. I'm going to draw this episode to a close, and I'm going to see you all again next week, Tuesday, for a brand new spanking episode of the Toya Talks podcast. I can't wait to deliver it to you. I'm so excited about next week's episode. Anyway, I'm going to leave it here. Please have a great week. Whatever day it is that you're listening to the Toya Talks podcast, please make sure you recommend it to somebody new. I definitely know the success of this podcast has been through recommendations, and I'm really, really happy that you guys are going on this Toy Talks journey with me. I cannot wait to meet some of you during the next Toy Talks live, and I cannot wait to deliver a live Toy Talks. That's going to be amazing. My second one, I'm really looking forward to it. Anyway, guys, I'm going to leave it here. Have a great week. Make sure you take care of yourselves and each other. My name is Toy Washington, and you have been listening to the Toy Talks podcast.